question, which is about, I was really struck by what you said about hope, and the converse of that, of course, hopelessness. And I came to see you when you were doing the social mobility review, and I was starting up an organisation in my constituency to get employers involved in schools and helping to build confidence, and the social capital point that you made, because in boroughs like Tower Hamlets and constituencies like mine, it's not the shortage of bankers and others, it's the inability for the system to bring those two groups together, so you could live in a block of flats with, you know, high finances at the top of the block and social housing tenants at the bottom, and never shall they meet. So in terms of the point you made about engagement and job readiness, schools are still very stretched despite more investment now. You know, I'd say, I would put it to you that the system, the state, whoever's in power, is poor at looking at how to support that bridging social capital piece, which is key, because employers need to be in the school and colleges and universities to help with that job readiness process. And it's just not happening, despite lots of good initiatives, whether it's local charities, local organisations. And there tends to be a bias of Conservative governments tend to think private sector is good and can do all of this, and public sector can't. And our bias, Labour bias, tends to be more on the other side. So what would you say needs to happen to address this point? Because there are lots of, you mentioned some examples, I've got lots of them in my own constituency, but scaling those initiatives are very difficult, and government, whoever's in charge, just lacks the imagination to actually help to scale the things that are working, and often repeats things that are not working.
Yeah, so I think, just briefly, I'm conscious of time, I think the first thing is to recognise that the so-called bridging function, which is what you're describing, Rishana, is an absolutely critical part of the architecture, and it doesn't really exist. It probably hasn't really existed since the abolition of connections, which was flawed, but actually provided that, and not least provided for individual young people someone who was brokering on their behalf. And that has disappeared. So that architecture doesn't exist, so we've got to think about whether that is necessary for the future. That's a really important aspect of it. Secondly, to the point that Lee was asking about, which is, can we learn things from other countries? Bridging functions seem to be much more established there than here, so we need to think about that. But it comes back to the essential point, which is, does public policy as a whole, not in vertical silos, but as a whole, does it see this as an issue that everyone has a responsibility to play their part in solving? And I would say right now, honestly, it doesn't, and it should. And I'm hoping the consequence of this review, and indeed your report, is that that is where the government goes.
Thank you.